Yo, 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 another guitar lesson here for you. Got a question here from Bill Simpson. Appreciate you engaging and asking a question here. I'd like you to address at some point when you are soloing, do you want to stay in a neighborhood, meaning just because you know all the pentatonic positions all over the fretboard, do you want to use them? Or do you want to say, okay, this area or neighborhood is the palette I'm using to paint today, and I'm going to focus on creating in this area only? So, Bill, great question. Basically, let's see here. The idea is the end goal is to be able to use the entire guitar. But I know in my playing past, and I have a lot of students, I've seen this happen a lot, is people will rush to learn all the patterns, kind of like once they get all the patterns down, they know the guitar, but then what happens is when they go to solo, they only end up playing one little small area of the patterns that they learned, or they don't actually start putting them into practice. A lot of times it can be also just flat out overwhelming. If you learn all of this whole neck, if you really study it and learn it all within a week or two, and then to just start playing it, doesn't usually happen that way. So there's some wisdom in your question here, which is just because you may logically know all of the patterns, or you're striving to learn all the patterns, does it mean you should try to use the whole guitar? And the answer is kind of yes and no. It kind of depends on where you are. I know, for example, when I'm playing, so there's this thing that happens. If I'm going to go in, let's say I'm going to jam in A minor. So in A minor, and let's say I am going to take this long I'm going to build, I want to tell a longer story with my solo. I'm not necessarily going to start out playing fast and all over the neck of the guitar. I might pick, as you would call it, a neighborhood. Just kind of hang out in here and say a few things. And then over time, there's going to be a point where it feels organic and it feels necessary to start moving up a little bit. So in other words, this isn't a very good example of playing, but I'm trying to show you a little bit, but it's hard to kind of explain that without a band and without a jam session. But in other words, you can kind of think of it as the neighborhood is good for cultivating ideas and to get started, simplify, right? You don't need to see the whole pattern. You don't have to see the whole pattern when you start playing a solo. Just find an area that you want to start your solo in, and then allow the note choices, allow the music to guide you up or down the fretboard. So in other words, yeah, staying in a neighborhood is probably a good idea to cultivate some melodies and some strong ideas. And then there's going to be a point in time where you want to start to move to the next pattern or move down the fretboard. Now, if you don't know the shapes at that point, that's where people kind of get stuck and they just kind of stay in the neighborhood. And then most people that are studying this stuff, a lot of times they learn the shapes so they're not stuck. So in other words, but if you learn all the shapes, again, you might get overwhelmed. So my kind of message to anyone on this is there's this kind of organic growth. In other words, if you can play a solo in A minor, and you can just stay in this position, and you're coming up with ideas, and the well is still full, and milk it for all it's worth, totally. And the organic way would be, once you start finding a desire to get into some higher registers, that's when you really need to look at the next pattern. Because until then, you may memorize or try to learn the patterns, but if you don't really have a desire or you know how to use them practically, they're not going to come in handy. Once you milk it for what it's worth, this first pattern, and then you want to start going up, then you'll start to authentically want to learn the next pattern. It's not like a homework assignment where you just feel like you need to do it. It's more like out of necessity. So yes, staying in a neighborhood, as long as you're getting good results, totally cool. But then once you want to branch out, then learn the next pattern. Now your neighborhood's a little bigger. And then just kind of build in that way. That's more of an organic growth type of mindset, is just learn it when you are, like I said, you're ready to take on the new information. If you're just playing, if you've only been playing for a short while and you've only just kind of learned this and you're just starting to learn how to jam, it's kind of not going to be very fruitful to learn all of the patterns, even if it's something that you might be a strength of yours. We all have different strengths. You might have good pattern recognition and the patterns might come fairly easy to you, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to incorporate it into your playing. Like I said, you want to be able to move up in register whenever you feel like expressing that, not just because you know the shape, in other words. So anyway, I hope this is helping. Also, another idea too is even if you do, like, as you're learning these patterns, for example, let's say I know this pattern really well, and then I'm moving up to this one. The next one, you could call it C major. You could call it the second shape of A minor. One thing I do to make sure I really know a pattern is I force myself just to play in that area of the guitar. So in that sense, your question, should you stay in one neighborhood? You can, for a couple of reasons. Like I mentioned earlier, just to start the solo off and gain some momentum and get some good melodic and strong ideas going. But then also you can do it as a way to practice, as an exercise. I would think of it as more of an exercise, as just making sure I'm grounded in the pattern. So if I just add this pattern and then just start playing anything I want to, not focusing on the pattern, I'm not going to learn it as well. So anyway, I hope this helps. Encourage more questions from you guys. Always love the engagement. And if you have anything else, hit me up, let me know. Peace.